So hi, we're going to be kind of going through this week's progress, updating you guys on where we are on phase two, how helicopter progress is going, how the legacy triage has been going, and then we'll be taking questions at the end. You guys can feel free to just hold your questions either on the YouTube chat or on the Discord chat for about 20 to 30 minutes. We're going to try and keep these things shorter going into Saturday so that we can get back to trying and doing a play test every Saturday after these things and play with their community and get their feedback and talk to them in the rooms. So after this Circ HQ, we do the Q&A. We'll be aiming to do a public play test on the Discord because I know a lot of people have been asking to play with us and just have a good conversation talking about the game and whatnot. So going into this week, one of the goals that I set out to do myself was to polish and hunt down the key impact bugs for the legacy version, which is what currently is on the default branch of the game. I had mentioned this earlier in the month that getting to the end of phase one took longer than we expected, and that we felt that in the grand scheme of things, we needed to at least go back and triage parts of the default build, merge down the experimental, and work with the community in terms of identifying and resolving high impact bugs and issues that were inhibiting their ability to play the game reliably. Going into this week, I targeted and removed several other high impact bugs and issues like the turrets and the vehicles and weird animation visuals that break. Dynamic civilian groups should no longer spawn in weird locations that are like in the middle of a bridge, in the middle of a structure, in locations that would substantially break civilian evacuation, dynamic civilian groups, your movement, vehicle movement. So there was a little bit of editing and adjustment here and there to more cater to pre-authored locations for dynamic civilian groups in the older build. I'm still investigating and hunting down about 5 more bugs that people have been bringing to my attention on Steam and on Discord. The high impact ones that I'm trying to resolve going into Monday, Tuesday, so I can go back and help on the rebuild would be namely double clicking units not being reliable and working, some civilian evac issues. Well, most of them are civilian evac issues that are remaining. Some issues with the groups when you have larger groups like in the Atlas. There are some issues with reliability of vehicles. So I'm looking at some edge cases here and there, but I'm still gonna have to most likely wait until we get to phase 3 to implement and finish the vehicle driving AI. But I will be looking at some edge cases here and there and seeing if I can resolve or improve them to buy us some time to finish the rebuild. Because ultimately, what's in the legacy is going to be deleted and replaced with what we're doing in the rebuild. Now, one thing I also want to note is that earlier in the week, we did add in all of the base languages to the game, and we got the game translated on Legacy. So people that are watching on on the rebuild. So people that are watching on Steam, on YouTube and whatnot, and Discord, if you guys would, if you like speak another language other than English, please go and check out the rebuild's localization of Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. Let us know how the translation is, and let us know if there's anything we need to correct or change so that we can adjust accordingly. In the coming weeks, my goal is going to be, as we're rapidly moving to phase 2 and phase 3, is to start doing monthly goals of at the end of the month, take all the changes and all the updates to the game and submit that to localization. So then that way it does not become the previous problem we had in Legacy on experimental and on the now newly merged build, where there was someone on Steam commenting about this the other day, is that we added so much content and so much UI that vast parts of the game are no longer translated in Chinese or French or X, Y, and Z. So right now, the entire game is translated in the confines of the rebuild. So let me know what you think about those. There might be some issues here and there, and we'll hunt them down and work with the community to resolve those. That was something else that I set out to do this week, was to fix that. I worked with the community to identify some high impact items related to just power generation, small little bugs in here that they've been bringing to my attention and Michael's attention when it came to the balance of the game, when it came to the replayability and small little like issues and bugs related to like I guess it was a thing that we missed on Discord, but the cats on Steam brought to our attention, where they were like, "Hey, if you do this, then you do that. Your power calculation is like some kind of weird math bug." So we got that ironed out. Another thing we did was that we snuck in the first of many of new infected types. Now I've talked with Michael at length about this. This is something we've wanted to do quite a bit, is to basically implement in and put in more variations of gameplay. So what you'll see on like your share screen here is the brute. We're working on other sub variations. Well, rather, he's working on it, because the beautiful part of the foundation is he's going in and he's coming up with like different variations of standard infected. With that one's a little bit fatter. That one's a little bit more skinnier. And then changing their attributes and their stats, giving them different melee weapons, and trying to basically add a little nuance to the minute-to-minute gameplay that will benefit Horde, but will greatly benefit Pandemic. Now, obviously, you'll still have to be able to have the ability to customize and turn off these archetypes and these different types of infected, because technically they're a type of standard infected, but they're between like that of a spitter and say a standard infected. They're not as like meaty. Um, so he got in the last build. He starts around wave 10 on Horde, and then he scales up linearly. As we go into phase 2, other things will trickle in the Horde as we do the AI and Pandemic. So an example would be the Juggernaut, Leviathan, the birds, the little guys. Those will all eventually have a trickle down effect, and substantially make the Horde mode more difficult. Add more waves that you have to plan for, you have to prepare for. Where like, hey, wave 20 is say when the Juggernaut starts coming up, and then wave 25 is like Leviathan, and so on and so forth. So those are things that we're looking at as a trickle down effect as we're working on Pandemic, just to get it back to what it was in Legacy. What I also wanted to do was, let me bring up my notes here. Yeah, okay. And then let me pull up this. One other thing I want to hit upon is that do and go and check out Legacy. I have about 2 or 3 days left on Legacy Triage. If someone brings a really crazy bug or issue to my attention on Steam or Discord, I will absolutely look into it. It's just that I'm trying to cut the cord by Tuesday night so I can get back on to helping get Pandemic back online. And we're gonna go into those plans going into next week in just a bit. Okay, so what I want to do is I was going to bring up the next thing. So give me a second. Let me go to share screen. Here's like the more visually impressive like render of the brute. But let me close out this window, and let me show some of the progress that we've had on the helicopter AI and how they are as it stands right now. So let me go ahead and load in, hit the play button, and then let me just mute the game's audio so I can hear myself think. Boom. And then we're gonna just pull this up. Click on that. So one of the things that Derek has been doing, based off of just listening to feedback over the years, was trying to get out of the issue of like, oh no, my helicopter does not have a good perception of its environment, so I'm going to run into that building and then slide against it and then go around the corner. Now, mind you, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't horrible, but it was pretty bad. And that was one of the major things that we set out to resolve with this second version, the second pass, you can say, of the rebuild, is taking some of the feedback and some of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years and implementing that into having a more robust system for being able to dynamically pathfind in the 3D space of like how complicated a helicopter can function in these games. So it understands like, oh, like I need to scale up higher sooner. It understands like, oh, I don't need to like literally like, that might fail actually because we're still working on it. But you figure I don't need to basically like thread the needle and like get so close that I'm gonna accidentally skid against it and then break. So you can see like in that instance, it just knew stay at your current elevation and just keep on cruising. And you can see here's another example where, like in the previous version, it would have just been like, "Oh boy, let's go," and it would have just rammed right into the stilted tower. Maybe if you were lucky, it would have pitched up and then went over it. You probably were unlucky, and it would have probably have slammed into the building here, and then basically slid along it until it got free right around here, and then it would go like that. So one of the things that we did this time was just working on a pathfinding that's live again that like understands on the 3D space like the buildings, and there's like a default, I guess you can say, like altitude that all of the helicopters use now, and basically that's the altitude that they natively pathfind at, and then they will course correct and go up or down based on the requirements of like you know the environment. So there's a quick little example of how it works with that. And if I click on this structure, you'll see it's going to just know, oh, I just need to gain altitude and then level out. Now, one of the other major things that I was very, very like strict on in terms of basically getting resolved this time around was, I don't know if you guys remember this, I'm sure you guys do, is that when the little birds would do that shit where they would overshoot, or the Blackhawks or the Sharons, where they would overshoot and then come back, like they'd like swing forwards and then swing backwards because there wasn't a proper deceleration, I guess you could say, logic going on there. So that's something else that we've been putting in a substantial amount of time in terms of working on the deceleration and the velocity. So there's not like, because every second matters of every, like, like when you're trying to do these deploys, when you're trying to land somewhere, when you're trying to do a rappel, it needs to be get there immediately, turn on a dime, fast and the furious. Like there can't be any room for error. Because like on our first version that we showed earlier in the week, they were like grandpa. But they'd be like, "Oh boy, I gotta make sure I don't turn too fast on this corner." And they would like decelerate way too soon to the point where it was like, I need a stopwatch to figure out when they're going to arrive. And you can see that like, yeah, I don't care if I lost. But you can see like all of the logic that's going into calculating it, where the idea is that like there are like spear traces and other mathematics that goes into it with the physics and everything else that's trying to determine like what do we need to do to reach said location. So like if I go here, it knows like, but if I go there, you can see the points that are being generated, and we're able to see the points. And this is also the same kind of like improvements that we're going to be implementing on the vehicles when we come down to doing them in phase 2. Because ironically, working on this is also setting the foundation of some of the work that we did in experimental in the merge, but we need to take a couple steps further. So this is also just a stepping stone for the like the Ajax and the Abrams and the Bradleys and all that stuff in terms of what can we do to kind of like thread the needle and figure out the most efficient ways of doing this pathfinding. Because if I know it means it is simple, um, as you guys know, just playing games like Arma and other games like that, where it's like you get the AI that sometimes get confused very easily when it comes to driving. So we're actively just kind of R&Ding it and figuring it out. Now, what I'm gonna do now? Oh wait, did they just? Oh yeah, they destroyed them. They just don't have a def model. So let me restart because these helicopters aren't ready for real gameplay yet. So you figure like they're still like probably about 24 to 48 hours away from the point where we can give them to you guys to try and break. Because one of the last things that Derek was working on last night was like the formation movement and trying to keep some kind of synergy and movement and some kind of like formation. Because like I had talked about months ago, one of the things that I wanted to do was make it to where, let me lower the quality of the stream because I guess some people are saying it's not loading as fluently. So basically one of the things that I wanted to do was have like 2 or 3 unique formations for when you only have helicopters. And then when you have infantry, you have that shared infantry, ground vehicle, ground infantry, like column and a single file line, and that's it. And you can see like again, like this is still one of the last things we were working on is that they kind of bob off of each other. And there's some weird jostling that's going on with little Timmy here. You can also see that like they're literally like floating inside of the thing. That was like one of the last things we did is that we got the garrison system updated. Now I talked about this previously in the year is that when we wrote the garrison system for the guard towers, it's the same fundamental system that we use for the Atlas, the JLTV, the Little Bird. So now Derek's going in and updating that and taking what we did in Legacy, sorry, and making the child version that helicopters use for having like an occupied pilot slot. So if you don't have that in there, the vehicle won't work. And the same thing for the vehicles, for ground vehicles. So you can start to see that by doing the helicopters, we're starting to form the basis of how the Ajax and other ground vehicles are going to function by having a driver instead of a pilot in those cases. And then you can see like how they're doing okay, but again, this strongly needs another day or two going into Monday, Tuesday of just like finishing up the kinks ideally for their pathfinding going into like Monday ideally. We try and aim to kind of get all of that rectified, or rather Derek is. And then at that point, it's going into bug fixes for the pilot, bug fixes for the garrison system, making sure that other people can get on the Little Bird. And then going into Tuesday, Wednesday, it'd be the weapons. So it's going to be like the Little Bird's Vulcans, the Little Bird's miniguns, and then updating their AI so they know how to target. Now, I saw a question in the chat, and keep in mind that there is no local like rotation on the helicopters. That's more of a last minute polish thing that we're doing, where they'll bank and they'll do some local mesh transforming, either at the animation blueprint layer or by setting local like relative orientations as they're moving, independent of their global rotation rather. So that way we can fake it that like, oh, when they turn this corner, like the helicopter will take that velocity and apply it to the mesh and rotate a little bit within like a cage of like local rotations. Like they go the body of the helicopter will contort and rotate a little bit. So that way it'll give the impression that there's some actual velocity, there's some actual weight to their movement. You know, so that's one of the things that we're saving like after we get the mainline priority items done, which is the pathfinding, the group formation system, the synergy with the ground units, because you have to be able to give a move order with little birds, or in this case helicopters with the ground infantry, and then being able to judge like how is it working, what kind of issues are we running into. So like those are the things that basically we're just kind of testing for. What I can do is I'll put them in a larger map so you guys can kind of see how that works, because this map is kind of very clean and sterile in terms of basically the amount of like verticality in it, and then we can move on to the next section. So let me go to no, that map's not set up yet, but I'll show you guys that so you can see what the level designers are doing on their side of porting over and getting Pandemic playable for y'all. Because as Derek's working on that, and I'm working on the merge, level designers are porting over and getting the assets and everything else set up in this SDK for the rebuild of, you know, the Calypso base open world. They're making the changes for the base open world that I've talked about, like the idea of the turrets, where it's like I talked about it to nauseum about the turrets designs needed to change. They needed to go in the direction of say prototype, where they were more like standalone, more beefy, more chunky. So the same thing that I've talked about for God knows how long, like a goddamn broken record at this point, is also, oh, you know what? I don't think this map is set up for helicopters actually. So this might be a bad test. Yeah, this map is not set up yet. Let me not do it live and then embarrass myself. So we'll show this next week. So regardless, the week going into Wednesday, Friday, it'll be setting up this map for that and giving it to you guys on the Discords and on the Steams to break it, play it, and try out the Little Bird, the VTOL, the Black Hawk. And obviously the Chinook won't be able to transport anyone yet, like the helicopter, like they transport like vehicles. But you can still put like, you know, the 60 guys or whatever that fit in it. So at least you'll have that to be able to transport mass groups of infantry between horde objectives. So when you retreat, you could have a Chinook standing by, load everyone up, and then evac to the next point and salvage your units. Or if you know you're going to lose this point, you can have a Little Bird or a Black Hawk ready to go and load everyone up and get them to the next point way in advance. And that will also help the difficulty, because I've heard on the Steam forums that the difficulty is still pretty goddamn hard on this map. And so we'll come back to that next week. But what I do want to show is I want to load up the Pandemic version they've been working on and show what Efren and some of the other cats have been doing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna load up Half Moon Bay, and then I'm gonna load up the Pandemic HMB Master. So they have been so this map is ready to go, and it's waiting for the programmers to basically get to the point of obviously the triage being done, and then Derek's on the helicopter side of things. So we're the idea is around Wednesday to Thursday, both myself and Derek are going to regroup at the conclusion of helicopters and the triage to essentially get Half Moon Bay's pandemic base version online. Now, how that's going to come about going and just progressing is that we're going to be doing a 1 week sprint. Now, in game design, a sprint is basically when you set like a very directed, very straightforward, like start to end goal of like, okay, we're going to be doing this, and this, so we can get it playable, functional, and able to start getting active playtests running within a week or so. So, in our mind, we're aiming to basically get this map here to where Derek's working on custom game options for about a couple of days, give or take, going into that Friday, Monday. And then I'm working on Chelsea, the zones, the infection spreading, and the pods. And then he's going to join me either by Friday or on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So, in the grand scheme of things, our ultimate goal is to get a baseline pandemic mode functional and playing in some early state by around, say, hold on, we have my calendar, roughly around the 7th to the 10th is our rough assessment for getting a baseline pandemic mode in. Now, that's going to constitute just Chelsea, the infected, the building, the pods, the gas towers, just a baseline entry system. And then we'll build on that over supplement weeks, where every week after that, we'll focus on different impact, different aspects of pandemic. So we can round out next month, which is September, getting half of phase, a good quarter of phase 2 done. Because you figure we already know how the game is supposed to play. We already have all the art assets. We already have all the prototype code and all the source assets in. So now it's just a matter of taking that logic and then going into this map, this pandemic version of the map, and basically getting rid of the horde counter. There's definitely some bugs going on with the zones here, so I'll have to talk to Efren about that. But basically going in and getting this version of the map situated, so then that way you guys can jump in and play with your friends, do the co-op, and start giving us early level feedback in terms of the mutilators. Because a big push of phase 2 is doing the custom game options. We want to enable people to make the zombie pandemic simulator of what they want to play, not necessarily what we want you to play. We want you to play director's kind of recruit, but if you don't want to fuck with that, you don't have to. So if you don't want to play with the Leviathan or the Juggernaut or the Spitters or the Blow Up guys, we want to give you guys the ability to turn them off. But not everyone's not going to want to go in there and do a high level of play testing and precision, because we're going to be giving you, this is why it's going to be a couple of days that Derek's just tasked on that while I'm doing the base entry pandemic mode, is his job is to go in and add those data-oriented approaches to give people the ability to balance the game outside of our stock values. So if they want to increase the melee damage, they can do that. They want to increase the health, change their max speed, change their minimum speed. You can do those things within the confines of the game, or just turn off certain special infected types and change the infection spreading rate. So if you want the game to be slower, you want the game to be faster, you can do all that. And again, like I mentioned previously, we'll be taking the base preset system that we prototyped in the default experimental branch and then applying that to either a Steam workshop or some kind of back-end system so you can share those presets. So say little Timmy, wants to go in and spend 3 hours creating new games and balancing numbers and finding the ideal, their ideal simulation of 28 weeks later, or I Am Legend of how they function. Put up a Steam workshop image and then basically put up a description, and then someone can go and subscribe to that mod or subscribe to that. It'll download as a preset. The host just needs it. And then when clients join, they can play that version of the game's balancing. So you'll have recruited directors as like a preset, or like our ideal way of playing the game. But those are just starting points, ways of engaging with the game. And it's just like, okay, like how do I want to customize this? Now, what I would say is that next Circ HQ will go in greater detail and just show the progress associated with that as we start to wind down the helicopters and everything else. So then I would say not next Circ HQ, but the one after that. If you guys come, I highly recommend you do. So then that way you guys can tell us if you guys want us to consider other custom game options that we maybe have omitted over. Because you figure we want to give the depth for those systems. So that way people can jump in and make it to their whims of like, I hear you guys. People don't fucking like the Leviathan. I like it. A lot of people I talk to like it, but not everyone's going to like the guy. Not everyone's going to like the Juggernaut. They have in their mind what Cepheus is. We have in our mind as developers what Cepheus is. And our ability to meet you halfway is the custom game options and being able to tweak it to your heart's content of how you want your game to operate or go as. So that's what I wanted to hit upon and just kind of put that in out into the ether so you guys have a firmer understanding from a developer standpoint of what was in that bullet point list that we posted earlier in the week. Let me see if I can check my notes here. Yeah, okay. So let me go ahead and let me bring up the next area that I wanted to cover, and then we're going to move into the Q&A. So one of the other things, and I love this. This is like really great. We put a lot of we spent quite a bit of time just basically planning this out and working with Dimitri and a couple other cats to get this all situated. Was that I was very keen on getting rid of that ugly main menu that we had previously, and at the same time, giving the game a fresh layer of paint. So we went through and we skinned the UI, and we spent a considerable amount of time just making everything look more aesthetically pleasing. We got the keybinds in, we got the audio and the graphics and the display and the gameplay, and you can see we have the languages here now. So we did get all that in. And again, please try out those localizations and let me know how that feels. And then this is going to kind of be a primary conduit or a primary way of communicating with our community. It's just, you can click these and it'll open it in your browser, or it will open it in if you're not on Steam, it'll open it in your browser. If you're on Steam, it'll just open on your Steam browser. So just getting that set up. We set up a direct line to operator customization for people that only play RTS and they don't ever want to walk around as the operator. Is at the very least they can jump in. They can jump in and be able to customize their RTS heroes of like, okay, Sally, I spelled that wrong. And then, give her a appearance, and then change her weapons, doing shader compiling. And then that way they can make their deck of hero units. Bob! And then give it Alan. And then that way they can go into RTS and they can go level up those heroes and play them. So you don't have to go to explore Alcatraz. Go over here and then navigate the map. You can, and then we also added in, so when you press insert as an operator, the operator customization takes you to the gunsmith outside. Now, one of the other things that Dimitri's been working on, as you can see, slowly but surely, he's been adding on like the macro detail of like the actual definition of the building. This guy is very, very a stickler for small details and attention to detail, and looking at the thousands of photos that we took when we went to Alcatraz, looking at the jail cells, looking at the sizing, the measurements, the way that the sunlight comes in from the ceiling rafters and everything else, and just getting everything situated. Now, there's still some Z fighting like that he's going to have to eliminate, because that's probably just assets on top of each other. Or just he brought in a blockout asset, so on his ass, to bring in the dimensions of the area, so you guys wouldn't just be able to walk around in an empty gray box space. So you guys get an idea of the definition that's going into this hub. Because not only will this serve as the hub for like the players to stage and play out of, but it was important to me to get this area designed conceptually for the campaign going into 2026, where it's like, okay, now a major chunk of gameplay is done for the open world map. It's done because we'll have the exterior version of the Alcatraz, an emptied version of it for RTS for players to go build on. And then it has also like the stuff we need to move into the campaign and work on cutscenes and all that. So you can see that slowly but surely this area is just kind of being defined and filled in. Like that's a new area. This is a brand new area that he just put in. That's the warden's office over there, and that leads up to the second floor over there. So he's just kind of been going through and just kind of, I guess you could say every couple of days, he just makes a chunk, hyper polishes it, does the detail work. Like those are the rafters that the guards would walk along in Alcatraz. And then you figured he's just kind of fleshing it all out. So slowly but surely, and then also he kind of went through and he's been sprucing up the textures outside, making them look more aesthetically pleasing. And just kind of like, that's the other thing he's going to be doing, is going through and just getting this entire hub so it's ready for prime time by like Halloween sale, ideally. At this point, based off of just being one artist, Dimitri's pretty much just going to be on this just to kind of take it all the way down the line and finish up this island to completion. So it's a top of the line hub. It stands with the best of the best in terms of the visuals, the immersion, the population of AI walking around. That'll just be him and Michael every once in a while for Michael putting in animations and AI and whatnot. So and then you can see he also put like a little like you can't see this, but it's Dimitri. This is more so for the RTS cats because as it stands, the next map that I'm going to show you guys is essentially the one that's going to replace the current map that you guys are playing on in the merge, where it's like this area here is going to be empty. The paradise ground, this area will be empty in the RTS version. A lot of this area down here will be empty. Some of this area will be cleared out, and there'll be small little areas that you can build on, and then like other areas that are just like it's visual, like you can that kind of stuff. So we'll be having an RTS version of this that will convert over to the map I'm going to show next. And again, we'll have a build today, so you'll be able to go into the hub and explore it and look at all the fine details and just see what kind of wizardry Dimitri has been up to. So the next thing I want to do is I want to load up the map that I was showing in the public Discord yesterday with some of the Patreons because they were asking a couple of questions and I wanted to address it for them, but I also want to address it for y'all here. And then this is the last thing I'm going to show, and then we're going to segue right into doing the questions. We'll do questions for about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the frequency of questions. And then at that point, I'll shut down the stream, be on my personal Twitch, and I'll be basically streaming the game with anyone that wants to come and play, have a good time, talk to myself, and just kind of have, yeah. And then I'll put the video up on YouTube naturally, like I always do, as a current snapshot of where the game is in terms of progress. So after this load, this might take a good 30 seconds. So I don't know, get a cup of coffee. Don't run too far away because once it does load, I'll be starting immediately and just kind of going through what Efren's doing right now. This is essentially Efren's baby. Is that it's also, making sure that the other the other pandemic map is situated for Half Moon Bay. But most of like 95 to 98% of his time has been porting over the older maps, merging them up, and getting everything set into this new final open world master map. So when this loads, we'll go through that in just a second. Oh yeah, it's at the end. That TI. So that means it's probably about another 5. Ah, there it goes. Oh, it's preparing textures. Hold on. We turn off navigation because we're not going to be playing on this map. Give it some time to prepare shaders. It's loading it from the hard drive. Okay, so we haven't shown this version off, but this is so. Again, we mentioned there's the Half Moon Bay version of Pandemic, which is going to be the initial offering that you guys are going to be playing going into next month. And then between October and December, the next line item for those cats to get as like the main course for you guys to play is this map. So they're still working through it. and situating it. But I'll give you a couple of examples of like Alcatraz, the map that you guys just saw, will be placed here for an RTS version. So it's something that they'll be working to do, or rather, Efren will be working to do to get situated. Um, the Western Island here, gone. Power Plant Island, gone. The fictional version of Alcatraz that was here, gone. And the idea is we're bringing it more in alignment of the real world version of Treasure Island. So if I turn off game mode, you can see the guidelines that we have in terms of basically they're going to be building out a hill and just digging it out and bringing this area in course of correction of the real world version of Treasure Island, moving around Chelsea's villa and doing what Fortnite kind of does to a certain degree. Rearrange the table a little bit to facilitate the visuals and the evolution of the game. And now that we have Unreal Engine 5 and they fixed a lot of the reasons why. The reason why this island was here and the reason why Treasure Island was over there and Angel Island was so close is that the further you got away from 000, which is approximately where that widget is, the more inaccurate the mouse clicks would get and the more the game would the engine would destabilize. And they added double float precision in Unreal Engine 5, which was sorely needed for large games. So you could like have really large, like kilometer-sized games. So now that we have that versatility, we're gonna take advantage of it. So, you'll have the Oakland Bay Bridge that'll start here. It'll run to this support here, and then you'll have a little like if you look up the real version of San Francisco, you'll have your guideline there what we're basically doing, and then that will connect to the main course. So their goal going into October-ish and December is to get this area playable as the fightable version of open world. In terms of basically like, and it's not at that point. We're not even gonna call it open world at that point. It's just gonna be called the Bay Area. And you figure like we've teased this map for God knows how long. It's been on the back burner because of the amount of resources that we had. We had to pull everyone off of this map so we could do the vehicles last year. The Bradleys, the Abrams, do map optimizations, remodel some older structures in this area of the game. Like the police station and whatnot. Just make everything look a little more aesthetically pleasing and polish up visuals and made the game look like it was a goddamn PS2 game. So, same thing applies here, where right now they're setting up the ley lines. They're going to be working on this and augmenting this island so that it fits the real world version of Treasure Island. Which go to Google Maps, look at this, and you'll get some context. Actually, I'll just bring it up for y'all, so you get some context, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So, if I bring up my Google Maps, I will show you guys very briefly before we move on. So let me pull this over. As you can see, that this is the real version of Treasure Island. And we made it quite a few artistic liberties. Now, one of the things that we're aiming on doing is most likely we'll downsize on the wharf here. We're going to integrate the bridge here. Chelsea's villa is going to be moved from the location it was here to the top here. And we're going to build the high-income housing and all the other stuff on the hill overlooking San Francisco. The police station is going to be moved over here with some of the more high-end housing kind of filling in this area. You can see they've been doing a lot of modern, high-end redevelopment to make it more of a high-income like area or whatever. And then we're going to keep the naval yard the current size, and we'll just deviate artistically at the naval yard for having it have an airfield. In real life, it's a naval yard. So and then you have the lighthouse over here. And then so basically this area will be getting a bit of a facelift. There'll be a little more verticality. We have to integrate in the freeways to get in and off the island. Because again, in our mind, Treasure Island has always been the tease, the Turtle Island, and the main course is over there. So realistically, this is where you come to hide, or just the turtle. But if you do that, then she's going to kill millions over there, and you lose ultimately, because then you're going to have to fight block to block, and it's just going to be a slog if you let her spread that far, unless you just give up on the city as a whole, and basically just stage on the carrier on these two islands, and then just do kill missions on her. Of like, where is she? Okay, we don't care about how many people she's infected. Fuck the city. We're just here to kill her, and we win anyway. So that's one of the things that you'll have to contend with, because when we built this area, rather when Efren's been doing the really diligent job as one orders to build this area, There were a lot of areas that he set up so you could land the carrier, but at the same time be able to drop off units on like these little ports and these little offhangs that he's fleshed out. And then here's like the San Francisco Giants Stadium as an example. And then you can see those are the civilian evac points. So those are all brought over and ported over. So you can see like the foundations there that as they go in and as they skin these assets to make them more artistically pleasing, it'll be a very quick mobilization to making these assets work from the confines of the gameplay that we've established and built over years. So you can see like every structure has that set up. And so do the legacy buildings over here, where like if you click on them, it dictates the rules in terms of like where civilians come in and out. And that will see some nuance and some adjustment and changes here and there. Because believe you and me, there's a whole month assigned to just dynamic civilian groups and civilian evacuation. So we can solve some of the long-standing issues. Because in my mind, like we briefly went over, I answered a Steam post about this yesterday. So I'll put this in the ether now so people are aware of our current trajectory or our game plan per se. And then it might change based off of you guys, of feedback and bugs or whatever. But as it stands, because again, there's not as much foundational work that we have to do anymore. Because it took like 7 to 8 months to get to where we are now, to get everything solidified and built up again, and get the co-op infrastructure built into the game. Is now we're aiming for next month to get half of phase 2 done, and then October to finish the other phase of 2 with some bleed over, and then going into October, December, the goal is vehicles, because everyone wants vehicles first, and then go back and retie in all the progression systems for doctrines, so you don't just get the Apache or the Abrams or the little bird weapons off the rip, or there's an actual progression tree. So then that way you guys will get all the cool little doodads and toys to play with going into like October. And then post-October, all eyes are going to be on the vehicles. We'll port over the experimental versions of the vehicles and then use that as a foundation to solidify and work with our community to finalize them. So that's one of the things I just wanted to hit upon there in terms of basically like our priorities. That's our game plan. In our mind, we're doing hell or high water to basically get to the point by December to where we can get everything solidified. And the beautiful part is that we also got, a small little investor on to help kind of like help us get over that hurdle and push a little bit more resources going into December so we don't lose any trajectory over getting everything in. So it's one of those things where like we did that, we're pushing towards that direction. In our mind, we're trying to basically get everything everyone wants by the end of the year. Get it out with your guys' hand. That'll be a clean sweep reset. And then we can go into 2026 on this new foundation and be able to build meaningful content in terms of basically just the SWAT or the police faction, Natalie and the anarchists, the campaign, and world events, which are like some of the last line items that we have in 1.4. And then in our mind, we're done with the game in terms of its early access phase. And now we're moving into post-content support and ideally getting into a place of like Stellaris, where we can support it long-term over what people want to see in the game, whether it be new ways of playing like Doctrines or any maps like New York. Because that's the end goal. That's everything that we're building towards. That's everything that we've been that's the reason why we rebuilt the game, is we don't want to just throw it out. Okay, we're done, guys. Take the money and run. Blah blah blah. No, we care about the game. We're trying to build a like as you could say like a vessel or like a base that we can develop and add to over years. So that's why it was like, fuck it. We'll take the negative criticism. We'll take it that we're incompetent. Any other bullshit people will come up with, which is rightfully so. You guys played for a game. You expect the game to work. I understand that. It's just one of those things where it was just basically like, we're working as diligent as we can to get everything over and get everything, implemented again. One thing that I do want to mention before we move into the Q&A is that we're going to be changing the format of the Circ HQs to make them more laser focused. So this week, we got some of the recordings in late, so I got fucked on that account. So I'll be working with my devs to get them a little more orderly on that side. But my goal is to have a 20 to 30 minute YouTube premiere that we watch live together and then we segue into the Q&A. And that 20-minute 15-minute live premiere is going to be each developer themselves talking about what they did with recordings of what they did in those highlights, kind of like what Star Citizen does. And then from there, we would roll into the Q&A at the end. So that's what I want to do. And then that way we'd have the Q&A on Discord. And we can keep these Sook HQs hyper-focused and hyper-optimized. So I want to cut them down from 2 hours to 1 hour at most. We have more to talk about. Fine. But it's just one of those things that I'm looking at and I'm conscious of. And maybe do a written format. Like what Project Zomboid does for their Zomboid Thursdays or whatever. The people that don't want to sit through and skim a video kind of deal. So it's something I'll be looking into and see if I can look into some technologies that will basically take this video and summarize it, write up a draft, and then I can author it and clean it up and post it as a written post that I go back and I edit after the fact. People that just want to read and then maybe look at the high impact items, on the YouTube video later on by fast forwarding around, so we can make this information more evenly digestible and easier for people to find. Because not everyone even knows about these still. So what I want to do now is I want to open it up to questions. So if you asked the question previously and it got buried, please ask it again. If you're on YouTube, same thing. There hasn't been that many comments on YouTube, so I'll skim through that. So I'm going to start on Discord, and we're going to hit up some questions. We'll do it until it gets to a drought level of questions, and then we're immediately going to move into a playtest. And I'll just cook a build, and then we'll stage for that. So let's see what we got for questions. Let's see. Okay, so Discord. I answered your question, MH, earlier in the stream. I think he might have already left. So if he's still watching on YouTube, that is something we're doing. Where his question was, can we have animations for choppers that it shake very slowly right and left, like in real life, instead of being holding still and it lean forward, and while going forward or lean back for going back? Absolutely. So it's something that we're going to put it at the end as a polish item after we get the mainline pathfinding in. Let's see what we have here. Neon Taco 19 asks, would be cool when a tutorial is more fleshed out. Is that a tutorial message for the campaign is taking Alcatraz, teaches you the game and all that, and then you have access to the operator and such. Makes it make Alcatraz feel more personal for each person. Let me think about that for a second. So, I don't know if he's still here, Neon. Yeah, you're here. So you're suggesting that we maybe have like that little paradise ground. That was actually an idea that we had early off. Is that we were looking at modules like Arma, where we wanted to basically look into having it to where on the hub, where you have the paradise grounds, that would serve as like this area here, this little like patch, clear this out, and basically make that like a tutorial training area where it's like we teach the players civilian evacuation, we teach them how to fight, ROE, like that kind of stuff. Is that what you're suggesting? Be something like that, where it's like a little small, like you go to the main menu, you hit tutorials, and then you would load into like a quick little scenario where it would give you like a 1 to 5 minute rundown of different mechanics of the game. I'll give you a chance to reply back, and then I'm going to check YouTube. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, because we were thinking more like Arma, where you'd have like where Arma does it like in a fob, or they do it in some kind of like military base, and then they do like small little scenarios. Sins of a Solar Empire 2 does this as well. So we are conscious that we need fucking tutorials. We know that it's like kind of bad that you have to rely on YouTube and Discord and talking to people. The only reason why we haven't done it at this point is because the game obviously, well, not that I want to say obviously, it sounds like a dick, but you figure it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. So the old tutorials that we had like 2 years ago were just disabled because they were no longer representative of the game. So what you're advocating for is what I'm going to push for as we leave phase 3. So the best time to do that is at the end of Doctrines, and to just wrap it up, put a bow on, get Winter and some other people to do some more YouTube tutorials for people that need more information, like, and link that into the main menu. get some YouTube creators to do it, so that way they get some free views, and then some other people get like the free tutorials. And then like kind of like that project that prison architect does basically too, something like that basically. But also at the same time, we're gonna look into that for basically putting some actual tutorials in the game because I'm with you on that. It's just not the time yet because that takes resources away from the core programming and the gameplay. So that's like something I want to do at the end of phase three. Now, when it comes to your other question, let's see. New maps would be amazing for post content, different cities, countries. Could even be a DLC or expansions like add cities in England, UK, vehicles, give a new dynamic, new vehicles, etc. That is something that we want to look at. That is another reason why we made the Operators International. Is that there are some core Circ units, but then there are some that are from Germany and NATO. And we wanted to put in like other countries like Mexico, Japan, and X, Y, and Z from like the Oceanic alliance kind of stuff. That way we can build towards a direction of having like a circus, kind of like an international agency where they sometimes go in and help other countries handle their kind of stuff, just like the CDC would do for any other country having like an epidemic. Is they'll advise and come in and give their expertise. So it's one of those things where we want to build in that direction long term. I'm looking from like where we are now to where we need to be in terms of like from a director standpoint of how to get to that point. And in my mind, it's like we get to phase three, and then we get to the point where it's like, hey, now we can take the systems that we've built on the open world and translate them to what you're suggesting. Because we've talked about it for a while, we've hinted about it. Is that I want to definitely do New York as the if we do any other map after this, it's gonna be New York because you figure prototype. It's like you figure like literally this game is heavily inspired off of prototype, like heavily. It's one of those things where I would definitely want to do something like that. Prototype Seattle and a couple other small cities, but eventually, what you're saying, potentially branch off into other like cities and mainland areas, and then eventually get to the point where we can release modding tools so people can make their own maps and locations. But you'd get like our content packs that we'd push out, but we also want to allow people long term to be able to make their own maps. So that's a design goal for us post like around 1.4, like around the campaign, is looking into the bare minimum of trying to get some kind of SDK in the hands of other people to use and whatnot. So just keep in mind, like those are things that we're conscious of. We come from a modding background. A lot of our team comes from a modding background. Michael, Derek, Efren. So it's one of those things where it's like it's important to us, but it's like we don't want to bite off more than we can chew. Because if Duravar has been here previously, and he can attest to this, is that if an indie team adds modding too early in their ecosystem, there's been teams on Steam that just abandon their tools because they have to maintain the SDK and they have to maintain the game, and you can see what that can be overwhelming. So and then we break your mods every time we do a major update. So it's one of those things where like we're pacing ourselves to do a modding system or a modding SDK long term when we have the resources and the manpower to make sure that it gets the right attention to detail and the right support. Because we don't want to just put one out there and then just be like, okay, guys, we did it. And then it's just hard to work with, So like that in its own of doing a proper modding system, a modding SDK, we're talking at least 2 or 3 months of just coming up with our first draft, presenting it, going on like the Steam workshop, poaching people on Discord and being like, hey, do we have any modders here? Like, do you guys want to sign up for an early access program for a modding SDK and tell us if it's good or if it's bad or what you'd like to see changed? That's the only way I'd want to do it. I just don't want to just throw something out there as like an afterthought. We did that for Pearson Natalie 2 years ago. I'm not doing that again. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to just put in a rebranded, retextured version of a thing and then call it done. I want some nuance and some uniqueness to how things function and operate and whatnot, whether it comes from the modding and whether it comes to other aspects. So I want to take the time to flesh these systems out and make sure that they're firing on all cylinders and that they are worth your guys' time to engage with. Because I hear this time and time again on Steam, is that we're the only game within this niche. We're the only game that fills that void of basically like what Cepheus is. You get to play your own ideal simulation from a military standpoint and live it out. And I've been talking. I'll join the public Discord. I'll talk to people all the time, and I'll be like, "How do you feel about the game? What are your concerns? Don't bullshit me. Is it a 6 or a 7 or a 5 or a 4? Why? How can we make it better? Where is it falling short? You know." So like, I'm always not one to sly away from like the hard conversations there, as long as you're not going to be like disrespectful or a dick. That I can have that conversation of like, well, like I think I was talking to Bob and Ford and Delta or a couple other cats last night. They were like, yeah, it feels kind of like this or that or these numbers. And I'm like, okay, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I don't give a shit. Tell me how we can make it better. And I was like, okay, some of those things we can triage for the merge. Some of them has to wait to the rebuild. And it's like being able to have that active communication and that level of like dialogue is important to me. Where it's like, I can be frank and honest and transparent with you, and then if I explain my thought process and my reasoning behind something, we can at least have a conversation there. You know what I mean? Kind of deal. Because I'm all about respecting and trying to find a middle ground. You know, that's been the game, the direction of the game since the beginning, since its inception, is being able to, you know, work with our community. And we can't do everything everyone asks all the time, but we'll at least hear what you have to say when it comes down to it. So let's see, is there any other questions before we wrap this up and we move on to the playtest segment of today? So let's see. So Neon said rather. Let's see. Tutorial conquers the appetizer of the first mission for campaign. Oh, okay, yeah, you already answered that. Okay, so is there any other questions anyone has before we wrap this up? Anyone wants to raise their hand or Discord or anything on YouTube? I'll give you guys another minute, and then we're gonna conclude it. Let's see. Actually, while you guys do that, I was curious anyway. Just float this anyway. So, what do you guys think about? Oh wait, I don't think I brought that up last Saturday. So I'm gonna bring this up just in case I didn't bring it up last week. Is that I didn't really get that much feedback for this, but I want to bring it up one more time because we're getting to a point where we're right about to implement pandemic. Is keep in mind going into this second version of pandemic, I want to make the game harder. One of the things that I'm making the game harder, it is really goddamn impossible to lose with the carrier loss objective. So one thing that I've been talking to the people on Discord about and just theory crafting with people, Durvar included and a couple other cats, is having in or loss conditions. You lose the circuitent here, or you lose the carrier, and that's a loss condition that sends you back. And the idea would be, because right now it's almost impossible to lose unless you like intentionally are trying to lose, like Hawkins was telling me yesterday. So the idea would be is that you place down this tent, and if you lose it, you're out of the game, start over, and you can pay a fee to have a sky crane come. Takes a minute or so for it to arrive. It'll pick it up, hook it up, and then drive it to the next destination. And you have to protect it on the way there. And you have to protect it while the team is coming to pick it up. And the idea is it adds an actual weight to what you choose to build your base, how you secure your base. Because you figure if you lose that, you're out. Because again, I mentioned this time and time again, as it stands right now, you literally can play the base version of the game, and it's impossible to lose. Any people that lost are because they weren't paying attention to the civilian evac. Yeah, very small. Probably about 20 to 30% of the community does civilian evac, based off of my guesstimates. So it's still like 70% of people can never lose the game, unless they intentionally somehow move the carrier next to a Leviathan. That's really hard to do. So, and my other concern is that when we added custom game options, it made it to where if you turn off a Leviathan and you turn off the birds, you can't lose anymore. So there has to be skin in the game. There has to be a way that you can lose at any given time, and you're not safe. You should never feel safe in terms of basically the gameplay flow and how everything else is operating. So that's generally another thing that we're aiming this to rectify, is that when we do this base pandemic version, it's going to have that mechanic and that system unique to pandemic mode, where when you place this down, you only get one, and that one is your central stronghold, your HQ with the carrier. You lose either or, you're out. and we're gonna test that and see how it feels, and then we'll alliterate and adjust as needed. Um, so that's something else that I wanted to throw out there for just something for people to talk about and give us some active feedback on. And I'll make a Steam post about it as well because I know everyone doesn't watch these. So from there, I don't see any more questions. So we're gonna segue into a public playtest. And again, I'll be live on my Twitch at Dark583 on Twitch. So if you want to jump in there, you're welcome to. And I'll just be playing that with people on Discord. And then the video will be on YouTube later tonight, probably like an hour or two. We're gonna play Horde 4. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for coming and seeing what kind of progress we're doing, sharing your feedback, sharing your criticism. It helps. Everything helps us towards building towards the end goal and the end vision of what we see the game as and what you want it to be as, and holding us accountable to basically just how things are going and whatnot. If you want to consider supporting our development, consider checking out our Patreon, consider buying some of the merch, or the Steam support packs of the book, or the chemos. They all help. They all basically fund our development alongside working on our day jobs, because the vast majority of the team does have day jobs alongside working on the game. So we do our 9 to 5, come home and do our what does that be, like 10 to 3 a.m. depending on the person. So you figure this is a passion project through and through. And for us, it's very important to make sure we take the time and to work with you guys to get it to where it needs to be. Anyhow, we're going to jump down. I'll meet you guys in game room 1, and we're going to go ahead and get this playtest going.